Thank you, David. We have next up is Jim Rubens. You heard a little bit about Jim in Lawrence Lessig's presentation. Jim served in the New Hampshire Senate as a state senator, chair of the New Hampshire GOP Platform Committee, ran the Republican parties for U.S. Senate in New Hampshire. Get these pulled up. And Jim was a serial entrepreneur, makes his living as an investor in commercial real estate, and serves on the board of the American Promise. And as we mentioned before, this is an incredible opportunity that we come together. I think, as Lawrence Lessig mentioned, there's no way we do this separately, filing off into silos and moving simply our own issue. It's going to take everyone coming together if we're going to have the states working on issues that begin restoring the balance in our nation. So with that, we're excited to hear from Jim Rubens. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you, folks, for being here and considering our proposition. Now, Sam Fieldman and I are more or less combining our presentations. I'll speak and then Sam will speak because we agree on the substance of the amendment that we're both seeking, both Wolf PAC and American Promise. And we thank you very much for considering our proposition. We look forward to your questions. So American Promise, we're in the business of leading the overall national strategy to get this amendment passed. The For Freedom Amendment is what we call it. And we're working state by state to build support so that Congress can't ignore the pressure coming up from the states. And we're also making sure that the amendment that comes out of Congress, because that's our approach, the amendment that comes out of Congress takes account of 4 core American principles. One of them is sovereignty of the people. Another of them is integrity in government. Another of them is federalism and freedom of speech. And to date, American Promise has secured the resolutions. These are non-binding resolutions from the states. 22 states have endorsed Congress, urged Congress to adopt an amendment that it would draft embodying that principle. So we know our nation's founders were assiduous students of human social history, and they learned to fear most the concentration of political power and then the corruption and the tyranny that always follows that type of concentration of power. They were therefore extremely careful to design in our Constitution multiple ways to divide and check this power. Perhaps our chief safeguard on this is federalism, embodied now in the 10th Amendment to the US Constitution. Now, flash forward to today, objectively measured, political power in the United States is once again as concentrated as it was under the European royalty that fomented the American Revolution. I'm going to say that again, power is concentrated today to the degree it was concentrated just before the American Revolution. And concentrated in means not imagined by our founders. And it's concentrated in large part by the political money system that has emerged over the past 2 or 3 decades, an explosion of non-candidate conduits for money, super PACs, leadership PACs, party PACs, C3s, C4, C6s, 527s, very few contributions or spending limits in any of those. Net, vastly more money is spent on elections and in politics, and members of Congress are forced, because they need to stay competitive, to spend, and we heard this before, half, a third, half or more of their time, their entire time in office raising money instead of serving the people, instead of solving the problems that we've heard about here. The system is busted. So these money conduits, and we can see a profusion of names. If you look at the political ads coming on your TV, you see a profusion of names. But in reality, when you dig down deep, you see that there's an extraordinary overlap in the decision makers that control this money. Billions in campaign money are now controlled by a few dozen individuals aligned with either of the 2 major parties. These, I call them political aristocrats, and they are centered in the gilded power centers of Washington, D.C., New York, and here in California, the northern part of the state. This is an aristocracy. And except in exceptional cases, you think of Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, where candidates can establish their own national branding. Access to this campaign money determines which candidates are viable and which issues get any kind of national attention. 80 to 90% of incumbents, as we know, 80 to 90% of congressional elections, the candidate with more money wins. So up until 2018, and this is getting partisan here, but it's important because of this forum. Until 2018, Republicans were the masters of this system. Since then, Democrats have been able to outraise and outspend Republicans by about 2 to 1 because the game has been figured out. And this asymmetry between the parties is now baked in. I'll just give you a couple of data. You can see a lot more of this if you go to opensecrets.org. We look at where the money comes from. It comes from the ruling zip codes of America. There are 10 major, top 10 major donor regions in 2010. You can see this data. 9 of those 10s are deeply, deeply blue. Only one of them, Las Vegas, is red. From those zip codes, those major metro regions, Dems outraised Republicans by about 4 to 1. Let's look at the last election again, 2020. Joe Biden won counties, US counties accounting for 71% of GDP in America. Donald Trump won counties accounting for 29%, down from 36% in 2016. Again, these advantages are baked in. Republicans no longer have any partisan self-interest in preserving this system. None anymore. Maybe in the past, not now. So here are three examples of how this system works. I ran for US Senate in 2014 in the primary, and I went to Washington. I begged, usually I got all the right meetings. I hired the right people. And the leadership of my party, the Republican Party, decided that they wanted to import a candidate from another state, which they did. And that candidate won the primary. And they imported this candidate from another state, not because the candidate was in any way connected with New Hampshire politics or knew our issues or had any background, but because the candidate had a proven ability to raise lots of money from Wall Street. That's why this candidate came in. The candidate came into New Hampshire, lost the general election because he got plastered with the carpetbagging. Example number 2, 2018, again from my own state of New Hampshire. Mike Bloomberg, you know he lives in New York. He takes special interest, special attention to gun control matters. And he did not like New Hampshire because we're basically a pro-gun state. He focuses attention on the New Hampshire House and the New Hampshire State Senate with his money. In large, Democrats hate it when I say this. He took his money and he flipped control of our legislatures in New Hampshire, which were Republican, in 2018 from D to R. One person from out of state did this. That's the system. In neighboring Maine, example number 3, the year 2000, we had a $200 million US Senate election, $200 million in a little state of Maine. And there's so much money was spent that they bought up all the TV ads. There was no inventory left. The prices spiked like crazy. It was a solid year of negative attack ads. It turned the voters off incredibly. And Maine's leading pro-Second Amendment group, called the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine, was not able to buy any ads. They were completely pushed out and could not be heard in the debate over their own US Senate election. And so it's interesting, the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine joined our American Promise coalition. They're now part of the effort to push for this amendment. And there are stories just like this in every state. So net concentrated out-of-state money dominates nearly every swing election in every state. So this is not just races for Congress, but it's state house control election, it's ballot initiatives, and now it's even gone down to school board, as we just saw in the state of Pennsylvania. So with surgical precision enabled by big data, this is a new form of aristocracy, and it's picking our candidates, and it's picking our issues, and it's silencing in-state voters, and it's backbenching in-state party activists like myself and many others. Here's what's happening. Grassroots, locally funded candidates for higher office are largely unviable. Candidates have lost control of their own elections. Political advertising is dominated by vacuous personal attack ads. Voters are becoming even more cynical. And local and state priorities are submerged, and every swing election, this is critical for federalism, every swing election is now homogenized and nationalized. Where have the states gone? So I'm saying it to the choir in the room here. Federalism is our protection against remote, ivory tower, one-size-fits-all government. Federalism guarantees respect for local preferences. It provides space to test ideas and to replicate them if they work, and allows us to live together as the United States of America despite our disagreements. Okay? So these protections are being washed away. The campaign money aristocracy is gutting federalism and neutering the 10th Amendment to our Constitution. And it's not just federalism. The campaign money system is mutating free market capitalism into crony capitalism. Now, myself, I love capitalism. I'm a small-scale entrepreneur. I'm a capitalist. I'm an investor. And I'm super proud of the fact that my state of New Hampshire has been ranked by the Fraser Institute as #1 in economic liberty, once again, for the most recent year. So I like capitalism. But American free market capitalism, we should note, has bestowed greater wealth and prosperity worldwide than in all prior human history. And human liberty cannot exist without free markets. But under crony cap, government picks the winners and losers. The high bidders in our political money system get the tax breaks, loan guarantees, regulatory favors, contract awards, paid for by taxpayers. So instead of slugging it out in the marketplace to deliver better products and services to consumers, business competes in Washington by buying influence or submitting to extortion. So it works in both directions. Why? Nothing complicated at all. Crony cap is immensely more profitable than free market capitalism. And this has been referenced, this study, a couple of times here this morning. A Sunlight Foundation study showed that for each $1 of spending on lobbying and campaign contributions, politically active corporations get $760 back. $1 invested, $760 back in contract awards and all those things I mentioned, regulatory favors, and it's paid for by taxpayers. This pay-to-play influence economy is why we have near monopoly industry consolidation in the US in many industries, cellular dead zones, corn ethanol subsidies, Ex-Im bank loans, and the world's highest drug prices. And this corrupted system of capitalism is why young and non-white voters, who will be a majority of us in a generation, now favor socialism over capitalism. And if we want to preserve free market capitalism, we've got to cut off the oxygen to the pay-to-play influence economy. And here's where we all tie together today. This crony cap, perfectly happy with exploding national debt, because the prime directive of concentrated political money is not advancing conservative or liberal ideas or principles. It's the endless push for nest feathering because it's more profitable. More spending, more tax loopholes paid for by taxpayers. And when taxpayers get fed up and rebel, no problem, turn on the Federal Reserve Board's printing press. And so what we got, we can draw a straight line from the crony-controlled campaign money system to short-termism, twisted monetary policy, we've seen Dave Walker's charts, unsustainable spending commitments, punishing future tax increases, and the impending loss of our reserve currency status for the American dollar. And if we want to pay for US imports in Chinese currency, it's coming. Keep the current campaign money system. It's not going to be pretty for us in America. And we can't wall off, and we've heard this before this morning, we can't wall off national security concerns from crony capitalism. And this has been referenced. Former Joint Chief of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, ranks national debt as the single greatest threat to US national security. Remember, the debt comes from the printing press, it comes from Congress, bought and paid for, it's submitting to extortion. We can't wall off this system of crony capitalism, of pay-to-play politics from national security. Crony cap is why we have sitting duck weapon systems like the F-35, like the Littoral Combat Ship, like redundant land-based nuclear weapon systems. These are tough for Republicans and Democrats to deal with when they're voting down there in Congress. These have got to be dealt with as issues. It's why industrial oligopoly in the defense sector has left, and I'm quoting from a major study, no effective competition for over half of FY 2017 military procurement. It's why 80% of military aircraft, there's a single de facto vendor for these products. and weapons manufacturer have used their campaign money to drive foreign and military policy. I'll quote from a Cato Institute analysis. Quote, "The policy of the United States is to sell weapons to just about any nation that can afford them without much concern for the consequences." And what are those consequences? A more destabilized world, bristling with loosely controlled weapon systems, increased debt, millions of killed, maimed, radicalized civilians, tens of millions of refugees, anti-US blowback, all of it sucking the United States and our allies into proxy war worldwide. Our enemies are using our corrupt campaign money system as a weapon against us. I can't go into deep detail here, but read a study by the Alliance for Securing Democracy. They show how Iran, China, and Russia are using our loophole-infested campaign system as a weapon against us to influence our policy in our country and our states. Intolerable. Silenced by rivers of weapons industry campaign money, revolving door sinecures, and a fog of pro-war opinion shaping on all the networks and journals, Congress has abandoned its sole constitutional authority to declare war, and the burdens of decades of these failed wars, where do they fall? Most heavily on our soldiers and their families. Record rates of suicide and PTSD among active duty, 300,000 deaths and injuries since this process began, 9/11. This abuse of our most patriotic Americans, greased by this campaign money system, this corrupt campaign money system, makes me vomit as a conservative. This cannot continue. So there's a solution to this. It's the For Our Freedom Amendment. Polling shows consistently Americans rank political corruption in Washington as the #1 most serious national issue, and repeated polling also shows that a supermajority of voters in both parties favor a constitutional amendment to deal with this problem. Two-thirds of Republicans voters back this amendment. And the beauty of the For Our Freedom Amendment is its simplicity. There are no dictates. The solutions are left up, the specifics are left up to legislators in the state and federal level within their respective jurisdictions. And this bill restores the balance of power between the branches by ending the reality over the past several decades that it's the courts, the Supreme Court is determining policy at a microscopic level relative to campaign funding. These questions should be in the hands of elected legislators. This amendment puts the power back in the hands of state legislatures, back in the hand of Congress within their respective jurisdiction. And it preserves federalism. I'll give you just 3 brief examples. Montana could restore its law, struck down by the Supreme Court, disallowing union and corporate money in their elections. Alaska could enact a donor voter bill so that out-of-state campaign contributions were banned. New Hampshire could increase limits on direct contributions to candidates. These are more direct as a compromise to completely shut off super PAC money. And Congress could exercise its critical national security authority and stop the flow of foreign money into our elections. This amendment would empower and require Congress to get cracking on this. So doing these things, unfortunately, will require a constitutional amendment because the Supreme Court has taken these questions out of the hand of state legislators, such as yourselves who are here, and out of the hands of Congress. And the need for our Freedom Amendment is compelled by our founders' extraordinary vision. A nation where citizens are free to participate in government, solely accountable to the government, the governed, and a nation free from the corruption and tyranny that grow in the dark swamps of concentrated power. So I thank you very much for your time, folks. Sam will speak a bit, and then we'll do Q&A and then the straw poll. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I'm Sam Fieldman. I'm National Counsel for Wolf PAC, and I want to thank American Promise for the great work that you do. You know, too often people try to paint this as one group or one goal or one path in competition with the others. And the point of this conference and the point of Wolf PAC and American Promise presenting together here today is to emphatically say that that is not the case. I'm not here for my group. I'm not here for my goal. I'm not here for my path. I'm here for actually two reasons, as Ken mentioned earlier. Their names are Hannah and Ginny, and they were born about 6 weeks after Wolf-PAC was founded. And so, you know, you can support or oppose term limits, and you can support or oppose a balanced budget. And that has nothing to do with whether or not you support or oppose using the same tool to end the corrupting influence of money in politics and restore the power in our democratic republic for my girls who are now growing up in a world without it. Just as you may have different opinions on who should win one election, but nobody in this room filled with elected officials would say that we should stop using elections as a tool of government. Nor do you tell voters to pick and choose just one election. You don't tell people to vote for your state legislator, but don't vote for president or don't vote for senator. The tools of our democracy are there to be used, and they don't run out. Just because we use them for one thing doesn't mean we can't use them for another. Just because you don't like the way someone's using them or you do like the way someone else is using them doesn't influence your decision on another use of those same tools. And in particular, Wolf-PAC and American Promise stress different paths, but that does not put us in competition, and very much the opposite, that puts us in a partnership. That has been true of every successful movement for amendments going back to the very founding of our country. John Jay, the first Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court, wrote a letter calling for the first use of the Article 5 Convention. And that was limited specifically to the quite a few amendments that were proposed by the various Article 7 ratifying conventions that ratified the US Constitution. Alexander Hamilton, who helped him write that, also then advocated for, he said, quote, the rage for amendments, in my opinion, is rather to be parried by address than encountered with open force. And he said that in reference to his effort to try to get James Madison, all three of those, by the way, were the three authors of the Federalist Papers, to write the Bill of Rights. It took 2 Article 5 convention calls, as well as a tremendous amount of additional political pressure on Congress to get the Bill of Rights. And that was the first successful use of this tool by our founding fathers directly. The next effort, which has been mentioned a few times, came from the 17th Amendment. As I mentioned earlier, there was a group of state legislators in Pennsylvania who got together and decided that they needed to have a concerted effort, an Article 5 convention push. There had been one Article 5 convention call in Nebraska a few years earlier that was not organized together with any other states, and it didn't go anywhere. But the Pennsylvania state legislators sent messages and talked to their colleagues from around the country. And within 10 years, they got enough Article 5 convention calls that helped put pressure on the Senate. The Senate was never on its own going to actually propose a direct election of senators. They were pretty happy with what was called the Millionaires Club at the time. But it wasn't enough on its own. There were other efforts that were going on at the same time. There was the Oregon Plan and other efforts as well that were in the process of changing the makeup of the Senate while this effort was going on. And the two of those worked together to put pressure on the Senate until what had been impossible eventually became inevitable. Over the last 45 years, the special interests that we beat back at the end of the Gilded Age have reemerged. I think that's been a strong theme that's been talked about a lot today. And we need you again, you, the state legislators from around this country, who are most intimately familiar with your constituents. We need you to fight back. But it isn't going to be easy, and it's going to require everyone to work together toward a solution, working together, not in competition. The first time Congress held a hearing to discuss the Free and Fair Elections Amendment, the Senate Committee Chairman, Patrick Leahy, from Vermont, credited the Vermont resolution from Wolf-PAC for why he held that hearing. And I want to play you a little clip from what Harry Reid said when he testified there.
In 1998, I had a very close election with John Ensign. We each spent about $10 million.
Oh, wait.
And we were allowed to do that because the Supreme Court again had left an opening that said,
yeah, there we go.
1998, I had a very close election with John Ensign. We each spent about $10 million. And we were allowed to do that because the Supreme Court again had left an opening that said you could divert money into the state party. And that money could be corporate money, it could be any kind of money, and that could be used for denigrating the other person or building the person who had the money up. It was a bad situation. I felt so unclean, for lack of a better word. A person could give lots of money, and then comes 2010. 2010 made 1998 seem like a picnic in the park. Money coming from every place. And Mr. President, not a suggestion where the money came from. Citizens for Good Government, good guys, sponsored this one. One person gave $250,000 for the state party. Of course, he wanted me to know that he had done it. Now, Mr. President, I hope that did not corrupt me, but it was corrupting. So we sit here today with a simple choice. We can keep the status quo and argue all day and all night, weekends, forever about whose billionaires are right, whose billionaires are wrong. Or we can work together to change the system, to get this shady money out of our democracy and restore the basic principles of one American, one vote.
So that's a lot easier to say at the time that he said it, which was when he was retiring from the Senate. And unfortunately, it's seductive when you're facing your next election to think that you're not being corrupted by the system. But as he said, even if you feel like you are not a corrupt person, the people in Congress are good people. They don't feel like they're corrupt. The system is corrupting and the system needs to change. And that's what we need to work towards. One person who understood that very well, in addition to Harry Reid, was John McCain, who had had his own issues with corruption.
I would very much like to think that I have never been a man whose favor could be bought. From my earliest youth, I would have considered such a reputation to be the most shameful ignominy imaginable. Yet that is exactly how millions of Americans viewed me for a time that I will forever consider one of the worst experiences of my life, close quote. Fill in the dots, get us from the Keating scandal to your passionate embrace of campaign finance reform.
I was always in favor of campaign finance reform. I worked with former Senator David Boren on the issues, and I was always a reformer. I created the appearance of impropriety, as you just said, 5 senators meeting with regulators on behalf of a major contributor. I can't excuse it to you. I can tell you, I mean, I can't give you a good reason for it. I can give you lots of excuses and how I said, I don't want any special favors for this guy and all that. But at the time, created the appearance of impropriety.
And at the time, it struck you as just the way things were done.
I was very uncomfortable with it. But
you were uncomfortable with it at the time.
Oh, yes. But I did it. Doesn't matter whether I was uncomfortable or not. I did it. And but it was again something that probably was reinforced in spades, and that is, it's not only what you do in politics, it's what you appear to do. So like in campaign financing and big money donors, it's not only corruption, it's the appearance of corruption.
So you come out of that experience, and one of the thoughts you have is, doggone it, members of the Senate of the United States ought not to be put in a position like that.
Or put themselves in a position like that, yes.
All right, but those are 2 different arguments, Senator.
Yeah.
I mean, the first argument, the system ought not to put us in that position, does with a trip and a leap.
All right, I'm going to leave that one there for the sake of time. So it's not just the corruption at the federal government that we're dealing with here. We're dealing with increasingly corruption at the state level and the federal government interfering with the state's ability to rein that in. As Jim mentioned, we've seen that in Montana now twice. Just recently, they were told by the FEC that they couldn't block foreign contributions and influence in their state ballot initiatives. And even if that is restored by Congress, a recent Supreme Court case from 2020 makes it impossible to know and to investigate if foreign contributions are even happening through dark money groups. So that law, even if it were restored, would still be unenforceable because of Supreme Court decisions. We've seen issues in Alaska with the Ninth Circuit recently overturning their campaign finance laws. And you know, who stands on the other side of this? Well, I'll give you an example. In New Jersey in 2014, the biggest opposition group that testified on the other side was a couple of lobbyists from the Koch brothers organization, Americans for Prosperity. And we passed over their objections, led by our local volunteers. A teenager named Walker Green led the effort there. Now, tomorrow, actually, there's a vote in the Senate to rescind that Article 5 convention call from New Jersey that passed in 2014. And that's being funded by groups backed by Soros, among others. So the right-wing billionaires tried to block it, and now the left-wing billionaires are trying to rescind it. I'm sure a lot of people in this room like a lot of Charles Koch's policies and hate everything that George Soros stands for. For others in this room, strike that, reverse it. But what they both agree on, and this is where you should be very wary, is where they both agree, is that they should be making these decisions. Big donors should be making these decisions, and special interests, foreign interests should be making these decisions. I say no. I say these decisions should be made by you, the state legislators, who are the closest people to your constituents, the people. My twin girls now, you can see in this picture, if that'll show up. Where's from Chris? Yeah, my twin girls now, you can see there, that's Jeff Clements, who's standing in the back, Mike Mineta, me, and then they're now almost 10 years old. They have a front row seat of watching the corruption in our government. And quite frankly, I'm tired of that. And I need help from you guys to help change that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jim and Sam. This is extremely informative and disturbing, and we've got our work cut out for us. Can we put up the poll question? Just in the interest of time, so you know, we're running a bit behind. We need to catch up a little bit for the time that we have left for the program. But so poll question, while that's out, if you have a question for Jim or Sam, polling is open. Would you support a constitutional amendment to restore power to Congress, to the states, to set limits on campaign money within their respective jurisdictions? While that's open, do we have any questions for Jim or Sam?
If you look at the campaign funding map right now, it tends to favor those that have winner take all. I live in one of those states, and the corruption is very difficult to contend with. Would you be supportive of rescinding those winner take alls so that an elector would be tied to the district that he is part of? American Promise is, forgive me, American Promise that I represent is, we're after one thing, which is the amendment to the Constitution. There are other organizations working on that type of issue, so we have not waded into that. I have my personal preferences, but American Promise has not waded into that question.
I have the exact same answer. There's a lot of groups that we work with that we're allied with who work on that sort of thing, but we're single issue.
Understand. Just like we just found that the corruption in politics, funding and operational process tends to silence the rest of the votes in those states.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why, like I said, we don't view it as a competition, and it's an all of, this is a huge problem, and we need all of the solutions to it. And we need different organizations working on different solutions, but working together to support each other.
One final point, Jeff Clements, our founder, our president of American Promise, way back in the back of the room there. Jeff and American Promise has purchased a booth. We have a booth right outside in the hall right there. Jeff and I will be out there for the next 2 or 3 days. One-on-one conversations, very much invited. Love to talk with particularly legislators.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. I know I told Jim I have a lot of questions I want to follow up. In the interest of time, we need to keep moving forward. I want to follow up with you afterwards, both with Sam and Jim. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your perspective and presentations. Give them a round of applause.